What if I told you the Tower of Babel was never destroyed? That instead of being scattered across the world with different languages, we stayed together, speaking the same language, building something even greater. Have you ever imagined what that world would be like? The biblical story tells us that humanity tried to reach the heavens with a giant tower, but God intervened and confused their languages, scattering everyone across the earth. But what if that never happened? Would we live in a unified and powerful society today? Or would that ambition have led us to ruin? In today's video, we're going to explore this intriguing possibility and discover what the consequences would be of a world where the Tower of Babel still stood. Get ready, because this reimagined story will blow your mind and challenge your faith. The story of the Tower of Babel begins in a post-flood world where humanity was still one nation, speaking one language. Led by Nimrod, a powerful and ambitious king, the people decided to build a grand city and a tower so tall that it would touch the heavens. The goal? To become unbeatable, to prevent themselves from being scattered across the earth, and perhaps to challenge God Himself. But now, imagine, what if God had never confused the languages? What if the construction had been completed? In this scenario, Nimrod would become the supreme leader of humanity, ruling a unified world. The tower, instead of an unfinished monument, would be the center of an advanced civilization full of knowledge, technology, and arrogance. The question remains, would humanity have found glory or dug its own destruction? Now imagine a world where the Tower of Babel was never stopped. Instead of diverse languages and cultures, humanity continued united, growing around a single language, a single city, and a single leadership. The tower became the beating heart of civilization, a monument not just of stone, but of knowledge, science, and progress. Without linguistic barriers, technological advancement would have been exponential. The exchange of ideas would happen without limits, driving discoveries in medicine, engineering, and astronomy far ahead of their time. While in our reality, knowledge took centuries to cross borders. In this alternative world, innovation would be instantaneous. Perhaps humanity would have already explored the stars long before even thinking about discovering new continents. But this unity comes at a price. Without cultural differences to challenge conventional thinking, there would be no diversity of ideas. Culture would be monotonous, without contrast, without its own identity. Art, music, and philosophy could be reduced to a single worldview, the view imposed by the leaders of the tower. And who would control this world? Nimrod or his descendants would become a dynasty of absolute leaders, ruling a humanity without a choice. Without borders and without national rivalries, conflicts would not be between nations, but between those who accept the established order and those who dare to question it. Furthermore, extreme unification would bring an invisible danger, the illusion of absolute power. Without limits to their ambition, humanity could forget their need for God, believing that everything can be achieved by their own strength. The tower, once a monument of greatness, would become a symbol of unbridled pride. With the completion of the Tower of Babel, humanity embarked on a path without dispersion. Without different languages, cultures intertwined into a single identity. What was once a vibrant mosaic of customs, beliefs, and traditions has now become a large, homogeneous empire. Without territorial divisions, the concept of countries never existed. Everything is centralized around the tower, which has become not only the landmark of human power, but also the political, economic, and technological center of the world. The idea of national identity, ethnicity, or borders never developed, as unity has always been the basis of civilization. With this, humanity became more efficient, but at the cost of diversity. But what about religion? What happened to God in a world where man never needed to seek the divine to find himself again? Faith, which in our reality was born from individual needs and the search for the Creator, was replaced by a cult of humanity itself. The Tower of Babel became a temple, not to God, but to the deeds of man. Religion was shaped to reinforce the glory of the empire, and Nimrod, or his successors, were elevated to an almost divine status. Prophets who challenged this narrative would be seen as traitors to the world order. Sacrifices on the altar are now not for a sovereign God, but to feed a system where loyalty to the tower is more important than any personal belief. Over time, God became a legend, a forgotten idea, a myth without space in a civilization that sees no need for a creator. After all, who needs a God when man himself believes he has achieved absolute dominion over all things? But even in the perfect empire, conflict is inevitable. Some begin to question this order. Small groups of dissidents emerge, suspicious of the system. They are people who feel an emptiness inside themselves, a longing for something beyond the monumental constructions and technological innovations. They realize that humanity has reached the top, but lost its soul in the process. This resistance is seen as a threat. In the beginning, they are just whispers, but soon they become a movement. What if true greatness was not in the tower, but in something greater? What if unity is actually a prison? The government responds with force. Dissidents are labeled as modern heretics, threats to the stability of society. History begins to be rewritten to erase any trace of the past, any mention of the God who once confused the languages of men. But something surprising happens. Even under oppression, this small spark of nonconformity continues to grow. In the midst of this scenario, a central character emerges, someone within the system itself who begins to see the cracks in the structure that seemed perfect. Someone who discovers that not everything can be controlled, and that perhaps humanity has made a fatal mistake in believing that it could reach heaven alone. Humanity has reached its peak. The Tower of Babel is not just a monument to engineering, but the beating heart of a global empire. Advanced technologies, a centralized economy, and unified culture make this a world where there are no wars between nations, because there are no nations. But something is wrong. Progress has brought absolute control. Every thought, every belief, and every doubt is monitored. The tower's government has become an unchallengeable force, dictating how people live, work, and even how they should think. True faith has been replaced by the worship of human power. The phrase engraved on the walls of the tower sums up the empire's mentality. Nothing is impossible for man. Some begin to realize that behind all this perfection, there is a void. Society thrives, but the human spirit languishes. The tower, once a symbol of humanity's glory, becomes a monument of arrogance. Secret groups begin to meet, murmuring about a God who has been forgotten. about a time when humanity was guided by something greater than its own ambition. Resistance grows. At first, they are just thinkers, questioning the authority of the tower. Then, leaders emerge who challenge the official narrative. The government responds with force. Dissidents are hunted, censored, and, in some cases, simply disappear. Order must be maintained, but this repression only strengthens the doubt. What if we are wrong? In the heart of the empire, one of its own leaders begins to question everything. This person, a high official, a scientist, or perhaps even a member of Nimrod's lineage, realizes that humanity may have crossed a dangerous line. The world has reached the top of the tower, but the human soul has never been so empty. The real conflict takes shape. Continue the expansion of the empire and ensure that humanity never again depends on God, or allow the truth to come to light, even if it means the collapse of the world as we know it. The Tower of Babel reigns absolute, but not everyone is satisfied. The idea of a unified world sounds perfect in theory, but in practice, the price of this unity is high. Without cultural diversity, without individual beliefs, and without room for questioning, humanity finds itself trapped in a golden cage. And some people are starting to notice that. Small groups begin to form in the shadows. They are the descendants of those who, deep down, miss something greater. Some have heard forbidden stories about a God who once intervened in human arrogance. Others simply cannot ignore the emptiness inside themselves. They meet clandestinely, spreading forbidden messages. True greatness is not in the tower, but in what has been forgotten. These rebels are persecuted relentlessly. The government, now highly advanced and controlling, quickly identifies any attempt to question. Cameras, drones, and tracking systems prevent public gatherings, and any word against the tower is considered treason. Still, the movement grows. What was once a whisper begins to turn into a silent scream. But resistance doesn't just come from the outside. Something unexpected happens. Within the empire's own elite, questions begin to arise. A high official, perhaps an architect of the tower, a scientist responsible for keeping the empire running, or a descendant of Nimrod's lineage, discovers ancient documents that speak of a time when men were free. The revelation is shocking. Unity was not a natural progress, but an imposition. The world was forced into this reality. This person begins to realize that the very system he helped build may be based on a lie. Now, this character faces a dilemma: continue serving the tower and secure his place of privilege, or risk everything to expose the truth. The rise of the tower brought with it incredible technological advances, but also profound moral challenges. With such a controlled world, questions such as freedom of thought, individual autonomy, and even the concept of the soul begin to be questioned. What does it mean to be human in a world where everything is standardized, where there is no personal identity, only a collective? If there is no belief in God, what defines morality? These questions begin to arise, and the tower has no good answers. The tension grows. The empire that seemed indestructible begins to show signs of fragility. Something big is about to happen. For centuries, the Tower of Babel has remained the beating heart of humanity, a symbol of progress, unity, and absolute power. But every empire has a limit, and that is about to be tested. It all starts with an unexpected collapse. Not a physical collapse, the tower remains imposing, but a collapse within the system itself, an error, a flaw that no one predicted. Perhaps it is a natural disaster, an earthquake, a cosmic phenomenon, something that defies all predictions. Perhaps it is a human error, an accident that reveals that the empire is not as perfect as it seems. Or perhaps it is a hack, an information leak that shows the world a truth that has long been hidden. The tower is not a symbol of strength, but of control. Whatever the trigger, the effect is the same. Confidence in the tower begins to crumble. At the center of this chaos, a key character makes a discovery that could change everything. This could be a leader of the tower, someone who has always believed in the established order, but who now sees cracks in the structure of the empire. Or a scientist, a historian, someone who has access to ancient documents that tell a forbidden story. The tower was not just a human project. There was divine intervention in the past. And humanity paid a price for ignoring this warning. Or perhaps it is someone from the resistance who, in the midst of the chaos, finds proof that the tower was built on a lie. The leaders always knew that there was something greater than man, but they hid this truth to maintain power. The revelation is shocking. The real danger was never dispersion. The real danger is what happens when man believes he can be God. The reaction of the empire is immediate. Anyone who questions the tower is considered a threat. Repression intensifies. But now, the doubt has already been planted. And once people start to question, there is no going back. The resistance, once a small group, gains strength. The idea that humanity needs something greater than its own ambition begins to spread. The empire faces a dilemma: brutally suppress any revolt and risk turning the dissidents into martyrs, or try to maintain the illusion of control while everything collapses little by little. The world is on the verge of a decision that could change everything. Will the Tower of Babel remain as a throne of humanity, or will it fall to make way for something greater? The question now is no longer, how did we get this far? But, is it worth continuing on this path? The great turning point has happened. The world will never be the same. The empire is on high alert. What once seemed like a perfect world is now on the brink of chaos. The tower, a symbol of human greatness, begins to lose its control over the population. The truths previously hidden have been exposed, and for the first time in centuries, people ask themselves, have we gone too far? The reaction of the leaders of the tower. The rulers cannot allow the empire to collapse. The system was built on the belief that humanity was unbeatable, and any idea to the contrary needs to be eradicated. The response is brutal. Security forces are sent into the streets to contain any dissent. Fear becomes the main tool to restore order. Anyone who questions the tower is labeled a destabilizer of peace. Information is manipulated. History is rewritten once again, and the government reinforces its propaganda. There is no need for a god when we have everything under control. But not all leaders are convinced. Some begin to realize that the empire has become a prison where freedom has been sacrificed in the name of unity. Among them, the key character who discovered the truth now faces an impossible choice: betray the system he helped build, or remain silent and let the world continue towards its own destruction. Despite the repression, doubt has already been planted. Before, people blindly followed orders because they believed they were living in the best possible version of humanity. Now, they're starting to question, if the tower is so perfect, why does it need fear to sustain itself? Underground groups are organizing to spread the truth. Forbidden messages are spray-painted on the walls. The tower is not eternal. Ancient books begin to circulate, describing a God who had already warned about the dangers of human pride. And amidst this chaos, people realize something terrifying. Without the tower, they don't know who they really are. Global unity, which has always been civilization's greatest achievement, now reveals itself to be a burden. Without diversity, without the freedom to question, humanity has lost its own identity. For the first time, people feel that absolute unity can be as destructive as fragmentation. The first deserters appear. Some government members flee or disappear mysteriously. Others try to hide their crisis of conscience behind a mask of loyalty. But the crack is already open. The empire may resist a little longer, but now it's only a matter of time. The question that echoes in everyone's mind is, what happens when an entire world realizes that its foundation was built on sand? The Tower of Babel is still standing, but for how long? The empire is cracking, and the Tower of Babel has never been so vulnerable. The protagonist, the one who discovered the truth about the tower, finds himself facing an impossible dilemma. Stay loyal to the system that built him, or help humanity recover something it lost long ago. Freedom. But what is freedom for a world that has never known another reality? The idea of living without the tower seems frightening to many. The system offered stability, order, progress. Who would trade security for an uncertain future? Still, there are those who understand that unity built on fear cannot last forever. True greatness lies not in a controlled empire, but in the choice of each individual. Publicly denounce the truth and risk being silenced. Secretly help the resistance, waiting for the right moment to act. Abandon everything and try to escape the tower before it collapses. Meanwhile, the empire makes its last move. It promises a new golden age, a complete reformulation to restore the people's trust. It's a desperate strategy to keep the tower standing. Humanity needs to choose between continuing on the path of total unity, accepting that its destiny will be controlled, or breaking free, even if it means chaos, challenges, and an uncertain future. Deep down, the protagonist realizes that this story isn't just about the Tower of Babel. It's about the human soul, about the choice between living under the illusion of control or accepting that there is something greater than ourselves. The empire is on the edge. The promises of a new beginning, made by the leaders of the tower, sound hollow. The people no longer believe in the words of the government. The resistance grows, and within the elite themselves, fear sets in. Is the tower doomed? The protagonist knows there's no more time. The options are clear. Either the tower falls, or the world will remain imprisoned forever. But how do you tear down something that has existed for centuries? Something that is not just a physical construction, but an idea, a system, a belief rooted in every person. Maybe the tower doesn't need to be torn down by external forces. Maybe it can be destroyed from within. The resistance is divided. Some want an open revolt, a rebellion to take the city, Others believe that change must come from within, exposing the truth so that the people themselves choose to abandon the tower. The protagonist realizes that, either way, a sacrifice will be necessary. He has access to something crucial: secret documents, a flaw in the control system, a message that can awaken the entire population to the truth. But if he releases this information, he knows he will be hunted mercilessly. Is he willing to pay the price? The leaders of the tower realize that the threat can no longer be ignored. They gather the people and make a final pronouncement. They promise a glorious future, but there is a cost. Anyone who questions the tower will be considered an enemy of humanity. Oppression reaches its maximum level. The protagonist has the key to tear everything down, but will he have the courage to use it? The decision needs to be made now, because the climax is approaching and the fate of humanity is about to be sealed. The fate of the Tower of Babel and of humanity comes down to this moment. The protagonist, after countless doubts and dilemmas, makes his choice. He knows there's no turning back. Either the truth comes out, or the world will remain imprisoned in the illusion of absolute control. The plan goes into action. The resistance, infiltrated within the very structure of the tower, prepares for its final move. The forbidden message, the truth hidden for centuries, needs to be revealed. Documents, recordings, concrete proof that the tower is not the salvation of humanity, but its prison, are ready to be revealed. The protagonist stands before the crowd. The elite of the tower are gathered. The rulers watch from the heights of their palaces, confident that any attempt at revolt will be crushed. But they didn't expect that the very foundation of their empire was already crumbling. Then, the revelation happens. The truth explodes before the eyes of the people. The leaders always knew of the existence of a God above humanity. Global unity was not a natural progress, but an imposition. Shock takes over the people. Those who blindly believed in the tower begin to question everything. The leaders are in despair. They try to suppress the revolt, but something changes. For the first time, fear no longer works. And then, the impossible happens. The crowd, once passive, turns against its rulers. The pillars of the empire begin to crumble, literally and figuratively. The tower, sustained by human pride, by the ambition to be like God, begins to collapse. Whether by a rebellion, a structural collapse, or even by a divine event, the fact is that the tower falls. The system that held humanity captive for centuries comes to an end. But what does this mean? The world now finds itself facing a new dilemma. What to do with newfound freedom? The tower is gone, but the future is still undefined. The history of humanity has just begun again. The Tower of Babel, for centuries the ultimate symbol of human greatness, is now just ruins. The empire that ruled with an iron fist has collapsed, and with it, the illusion that humanity could reach the heavens on its own. But the destruction of the tower is not the end of the story. On the contrary, it is a new beginning. For the first time, people experience something they have never had before: true freedom. Without a central controlling system, everyone now needs to decide who or what to trust. Some want to rebuild the tower, believing that unity was the only way to avoid chaos. Others want to rediscover the world, explore the unknown, and seek a purpose greater than simple human greatness. And then A small group, formed by those who knew the truth, makes a different choice. They begin to talk about something that has long been erased from history. God, the final reflection. Human pride versus God's plans. The alternative story of the Tower of Babel teaches us something powerful. Human beings, when moved only by their own ambition, will always seek absolute power. They will always try to build impenetrable kingdoms, towers that reach the heavens. But without God, all greatness is a fleeting illusion. In the original biblical account, God did not destroy the tower out of cruelty. He dismantled it because he knew where this path would lead humanity, to the destruction of itself. How many times in our own lives do we try to build our towers, believing that we can do everything on our own? How many times do we place our trust in systems, leaders, or even ourselves without realizing that everything without God is doomed to collapse? In the end, the fall of the Tower of Babel, in this alternative story, echoes an immutable truth. We were not made to build our own path to the heavens. We were made to seek the one who has already come to us. Now, the question remains, what are we trying to build without God today? The ruins of the Tower of Babel are now just a silent reminder of human arrogance. Without a single empire to control them, the survivors spread across the world, each seeking a new purpose. Some try to rebuild the old glory. Others, for the first time, seek something beyond what they can build with their own hands. Amidst the unknown, a question echoes. If we had another chance, would we choose the tower or would we choose God? And today, in our own lives, are we building something that glorifies ourselves or something that brings us closer to the Creator? The alternative story of the Tower of Babel may seem distant, but if we look closely, are we really that far from it? Today, we live in a world where technology allows us to be more connected than ever. Linguistic barriers have been virtually erased. With one click, we can talk to someone on the other side of the planet. Globalization has brought us unprecedented unity, and yet, we have never been so divided. We live in an era of paradoxes. We seek unity, but we fragment into ideologies, beliefs, and incessant disputes. We create digital towers, social networks that bring us closer, but that also fuel egos, pride, and a false sense of control over everything. Each one builds his own version of the Tower of Babel, a world where he feels safe, powerful, in control, but where, deep down, he may be farther from God than ever. Unity or fragmentation, God's balance. In the biblical account, God confused languages not to destroy humanity, but to save it from itself. He knew that a civilization united by pride and not by obedience would bring its own ruin. Dispersion was not a punishment, it was an act of grace. But what about today? Is fragmentation still the best answer? In the church, we see a reflection of this dilemma. On the one hand, there is the importance of unity in the body of Christ. We are called to be one body and one spirit, Ephesians 4:4, working together to glorify God. But on the other hand, there is the danger of artificial unity, where we unite by traditions, institutions, or leaders, but not by the gospel. What happens when we seek unity without God? We create denominations more concerned with structures than with genuine faith. We create an institutionalized Christianity where the presence of God can be exchanged for status, influence, or politics. The question then is not just, should we be united or dispersed, but rather, What are we uniting about? What does God want from us today? God never wanted us to be a uniform mass, without identity, without diversity. He created us unique, with different gifts, different callings, different stories. The purpose was never a tower. The purpose was always a relationship with Him. Christ came to restore that connection. When Jesus prays for His disciples in John 17, He asks that we be one, but one in Him. The unity that God desires for us is not the forced uniformity of Babel, but the unity of a people who walk together with hearts turned to Him. So, looking at our own lives, we need to ask ourselves, am I building something for my own glory or for the glory of God? Does my idea of unity come from a desire to be close to God or just to feel comfortable and safe? What am I trying to achieve with my own strength without depending on God? Does Babel still exist? In the end, perhaps the Tower of Babel was never just an isolated event in history. Perhaps Babel is a cycle, a pattern that humanity follows repeatedly whenever it tries to reach the heavens without God. But there is also another pattern. God always intervenes. He always gives us a chance to see beyond what we are building. The question is, when He calls, will we listen to Him or continue stacking bricks for a tower that sooner or later will fall? If the Tower of Babel had been completed, would humanity have really found glory or simply dug its own ruin? Would a world unified without God be a paradise or a gilded cage? Now I want to know your opinion. Do you think the world would be better or worse with the tower? Comment down below. I really want to see what you think about this. And if this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your friends, in your church group, with someone who likes deep biblical reflections. And of course, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps a lot so that more people can know this type of content. And I'll tell you in advance, in the next video, we're going to reimagine another biblical story in a way you've never seen before. If you don't want to miss that, turn on the bell because there's a lot of incredible stuff coming. Until next time, and remember, before building any tower, ask yourself, is it being made for God or for your own glory?